Hello, welcome all of you to this discussion. Today I am going to discuss on Indian Council Act 1892. The Indian Council Act 1892 was passed by the British Parliament to increase in the size of the legislative councils. This act marks the beginning of representative form of government in India. Now, what are the backgrounds of this Council Act 1892 enactment? The backgrounds of this Indian Council Act 1892, whereas the Indians were gradually becoming aware of their rights with the growth of nationalism. Indian National Congress had adopted some resolutions in its session in 1885 and 1889 and put its demand. The major demands like a simultaneous examinations of ICS to be held in England and in India, reforms of the Legislative Council and adoption of the principle of election in place of nomination, opposition to the annexion of Upper Burma, reduction in the military expenditure. The second demand mentioned above reflected the dissatisfaction of the Indians over the existing system of governance. The Indian leaders wanted admission of a considerable number of the elected members. They also wanted a right to discussion on budget matters. Viceroy Lord Dufresne set up a committee. The committee was given the responsibility to draw a plan for the enlargement of the provincial councils and enhancement of their status. The plan was drawn, but when it was referred to the Secretary of State for India, he did not agree to introduce this act, this proposal to direct election. However, principle of representation by way of indirect election was accepted with some limitations. But most important feature of this 1892 Council Act was the enlargement of the size of central as well as legislative council members. The act provided for additional members in the central as well as provincial legislative council. Central legislative council having minimum 10 members and maximum 16 members. And in Bombay Council 8 members, Madras Council 20 members, Bengal Province 20 members, and Northwestern Province 15 council members, Awadh 15 members. The powers of the Legislative Council was increased. The members could now discuss the budget without right to vote on it. They were also not allowed to ask supplementary questions. They could ask questions on domestic matters with prior permission of the Governor General. They were also allowed to ask questions on public interest. The Governor General in Council was empowered to make rules for information and nomination of the members subject to approval of Secretary of State for India. A system of indirect election was introduced to elect the members of the councils. The university, district board, municipalities, jamindars and members of commerce known as chambers of commerce were empowered to recommend members to provincial councils. functions of the provincial legislative councils were enlarged, and they were empowered to make new laws or repeal the old ones with the prior permission of Governor General. Governor General was empowered to fill the seat in the case of Central Legislative Council and by the Governor in the case of the Provincial Legislative Council. Now let us discuss critically the Act 1892. The Act of 1892 can be said to be the first step towards the beginning of the representative government in India. But however, such representation was via only indirect elections, and there was nothing for a common Indian. The system of indirect election prevented direct contact between the public and the representatives. In coming times, the Congress policy of petition, prayer, and protest was seen as a weakness by the British government. This was evident from the following note given by Bal Gangadhar Tilak, as political rights will have to be fought for. The moderates think that this can be won by persuasion, who think that they can only be obtained by strong pressures. Nevertheless, the Act at least provided the Indians an opportunity to share councils at the highest levels and thus laid down for foundation of the representative government. The number of Indians was increased in the legislative councils. The Act was an important milestone that led to the establishment of parliamentary government at a large stage. The Indian Council Act 1892 was an act of the Parliament of the United Kingdom that authorized an increase in the size of the various legislative councils in British India. This Council Act 1892 was the beginning of the parliamentary system in India. Thank you all for listening me.